So what are we going to talk about today? Well, I can tell you it's something I've never shared publicly all in one place. 24,000 tweets, 50 podcast appearances, hundreds of newsletters. I've never concisely put together all the ideas I'm going to share today. So basically, it's all brand new. And to stress the importance of this idea, I can say it's the single most powerful life and business idea I've learned over the last 10 years. It's because of this idea that I went from this to this, from this to this to this, and most importantly, from this to this. And that idea is bottleneck analysis. So that's what we're going to dive into today. So my goal of this presentation is to give you a concise but memorable explanation of bottleneck analysis that you can immediately apply to every area of your life. And I'll do that by talking first through a framework for building the V1 of anything by solving one bottleneck at a time. Then we'll talk about a mental model for ongoing improvement of any system and how to recognize good enough. And then finally, what I'm most excited for is take those two ideas and run through a full breakdown of the 22 bottlenecks we've removed in order to scale PGA from an idea in Apple Notes to over 1,000 students in under 18 months. That sound good with you guys? Yeah. Great. So one rule before we dive in, like Cole said earlier, do not take obsessive notes on this. If I put this together correctly, this will be the first of hopefully 10, 20, 30 times that you revisit this presentation. We'll record it. We'll give out the slides and all that good stuff. But what I will encourage you guys to do is grab a pen or whatever you're taking notes with and one of the little pieces of paper there in the middle and listen throughout the presentation for one golden nugget that you can apply, and right when you hear it, write it down and consider the presentation a win if you have that, at least on the first time you're listening to it. Cool? All right, let's do it. So, System Thinking 101, a quick primer before we dive into the frameworks I mentioned. Systems 101, there are three parts of a system. You have inputs, process, and outputs. Some examples of systems: your body, your business, your relationship. These are all systems. And when you start seeing the world this way, you'll recognize that the world is just a system of systems. When you zoom in on one part, you get another system. When you zoom in on that part, you get another system. And we're going to use that example throughout this presentation of zooming in on certain parts. For example, you have your business. That's one big system. Within that, you might have marketing, sales, fulfillment. Those are three different systems. You zoom in on marketing, you might have paid ads in your newsletter. You zoom in on that, and you might have your email subject line. So it's systems thinking all the way down. Bottleneck analysis is the study of improvement of those systems. So starting with the definition of a bottleneck is the single limiting factor keeping the system from reaching its ideal output. And the emphasis there on single is important because there is only one bottleneck at any given time. There's never two, there's never three, there's never four. There are multiple things that could be improved, but there's always one bottleneck you could work on. A couple examples of how those will show up. You can have a bottleneck that just means I need more inputs, so there's not enough inputs. You solve that by doing more. You can have a missing piece in your system that you solve by adding. You could have a blockage in your system that you solve by removing. And then you can have an inefficiency in the system that you improve by just making it better overall. So we're going to talk through a bunch of examples of how this works, but that's just kind of a quick primer on some of the terms we're going to use throughout. You guys feel good about Systems 101? Ready to move on? Cool. Okay, so first framework for building the V1 of anything by solving one bottleneck at a time, we're going to talk about the naked man's bottleneck. So I present to you a naked man. What's the bottleneck of this man?
He has no clothes.
No clothes, okay, good guess. The truth is we don't know because he doesn't have a goal. And without a goal, we don't have a bottleneck. So until then, that's his bottleneck. Because you could say he's naked, but if he's about to take a shower, that's actually not a bottleneck. It's not something keeping him from moving forward. So let's say our goal is to run a marathon. Now we have a goal. Great. We can do the bottleneck analysis and start the process. Now what's its bottleneck? We actually don't know, again, because he hasn't taken a step towards his goal. And so until you've taken a step towards your goal, you can't evaluate what the bottleneck is. So we say, all right, I got to figure out what my bottleneck is. He heads down to the street, says, I'm going to try and run a marathon. Takes off. He gets about 50 meters in. His feet are bleeding. He's in immense pain. He can't go any further. Now what's his bottleneck? He needs shoes. So he gets some shoes. He tries again. Heads down to the track. It's like, all right, I feel much better this time. He takes off 50 meters in, keeps going, passes where he was the first time, so the improvement was made. But now he gets 100 meters in, and he gets tackled by the cops. Sir, why are you running naked? Now what's his bottleneck? He needs clothes. So he gets some clothes. Now he's got shoes, and he's got clothes. Goes and tries again. 50 meters, passes it. 100 meters, passes it again. Keeps going. He's clearly making progress. But this time, he gets to mile 4, and he's exhausted. Breaks down, can't go any further. Now what's the bottleneck? He's out of shape. He's got to get in better shape. So he goes online, finds a program, says, all right, from statue to marathon, here's what I got to do. So he starts training. Day 1 goes well, day 2, day 3, day 4. He's getting a little bit better, getting a little bit better shape. The runs are getting more fun. But day 10, 11, 12 kicks in. Life starts to get in the way. Marathon training gets a little bit harder. And he starts to fall off. He skips a day, skips 2, skips 3. Soon enough, he's this guy on the couch eating KFC. Now what's his bottleneck? He needs consistency. He knows what he wants to do. He knows how to get there. Now he just needs to do it. So what's he do? Hires a coach. Coach starts running with him, holds him accountable, says you need to do this, this, this at this time. Great. So he starts training with him for 3 months. 3 months goes by. He's clearly getting in better shape. He's ready to give another try. So he heads down, signs up for a marathon. This time he's running 1 mile, 2 miles, 10 miles, 15. He's clearly making progress and is solving one bottleneck at a time. But this time he gets to mile 20, breaks down, immense pain again, but this time it was a mental blockage. He just could not gut through the dark place at the end of a marathon. Now what's his bottleneck? Mental toughness. So how do I solve that? Well, he goes down to the library and he finds David Goggins' book. So he's got all his training, but now he starts training his mind, callousing his mind, figuring out what do I do on mile 20, 21, 22, 23 to finish. And then, at this point, he's got everything he needs to run the marathon, signs up again, completes it. Victory. So what can we learn from this story? Handful of things. Lesson number 1, if you don't have a goal, that is your bottleneck. Because without a goal, you don't have a system. Without a system, you can't do any kind of bottleneck analysis. And that applies on the macro with something like make more money, applies on the micro of improving your newsletter subject line. You need to define what you're doing before you can have the bottleneck. And now the topic of setting goals deserves an entire keynote of its own because I think a lot of the information out there, at least for me personally, I haven't found super relevant. But the one framework I've found useful comes from my buddy George, and it's general ambition creates anxiety, but specific ambition creates direction. So having a goal like make more money has so many different paths that it becomes paralyzing to try and choose, and that the number of choices just becomes overwhelming. That's what creates anxiety. But if you have something specific, like make $6K a month writing 2 newsletters for 2 pet health supplement companies, that becomes specific, linear, and you at least know the first step. And that brings us to lesson number 2, which is bottlenecks present themselves only when you take a step towards your goal and fail. So our marathon runner could not have thought his way into all the bottlenecks he was going to face. He needed to immediately decide on running a marathon, taking a step towards it, and failing. And that's what he did. And so the faster you can get to this very simple loop of try, fail, learn, the faster you're going to move in anything you start pursuing. And that brings us to the third lesson, which is solving one bottleneck will show you the next one, and you must solve them in order. And so, for example, our guy needed shoes first, then he needed clothes, then he needed a training plan, then he needed to be consistent, and then finally, at the end, he needed to train his mindset. And if he'd only said, I'm going to try to run a marathon and start immediately with mindset, he would have had to read quite a few self-help books to try to run a marathon without shoes. But that's exactly what most people do, because the inconvenient truth is most people are naked statues without goals, reading David Goggins books, thinking that is what's going to get them to the next level. But in reality, that exercise is nothing but kind of productive procrastination, because if you are not removing a bottleneck, you are wasting your time. And so you can apply that to your business. If you cannot tie the actions you're taking today to the bottleneck it's removing, you can be much more efficient with how you're spending your time. So that's a recap from the Naked Marathon Man. If you don't have a goal, that's your bottleneck. Number 2, bottlenecks present themselves only when you take a step toward your goal and fail. And then number 3, solving one bottleneck will show you the next one, but you must solve them in order. All right, feeling good about that one? The Marathon Man, how to solve a V1 or building the V1 of anything by solving one bottleneck at a time? Perfect. That leads us to the second, which is a mental model for ongoing improvement of any system and how to recognize good enough. So stick with me as I explain this one because it builds on what we just talked about. We're going to model a pitching machine. Does everyone know the basics of a pitching machine, how it works? So basically, on the left, you have a pitching machine. We feed balls into it. It throws them over to a batter on the right. Between throws, it takes a second for you to load in another ball. The spring needs to reload, and then it throws the next one. So our goal is to make our machine efficient enough to throw enough baseballs to the batter for them to get a good workout. And you could see if we don't throw them on a fast enough cadence, they're going to get bored. So if, for example, it only threw one in a minute, he'd be sitting there, he'd swing, and then he'd have to stand there for another minute and nothing would happen. So our goal is to figure out what that number is. So we go to him and say, okay, how many ideally would you hit in a minute? He says 10. If you can make it where it throws me 10 pitches in a minute, we're in good shape. So that's our goal. 1 minute to throw 10 pitches. Building on what we just talked about, what's the bottleneck? Well, we got to try. So we plug it in, and nothing happens. We measure 0 throws. What's the bottleneck? We need baseballs. So I add a baseball to the top. I run my experiment. It throws 1. Great, we got closer to our goal. Time to take another step. So what do? We add another baseball. Now we're at 2. It throws 2. Cool, we're getting somewhere. We add 3. Throws 3. Add a 4th. Throws 4. This is easy. We're going to be there in no time. We add a 5th. Throws 5. We add a 6th. It throws 6. Something very interesting happens, though, when we add our 7th. Something strange, you would call it. And this is what most people think. At this point, it throws all 6, but there's 1 left. So we didn't get any closer to our goal. We added in that 7th ball. The timer went off, and it still only threw 6. So we're a little bit puzzled. What happened? We'd done all this work every single time we added another baseball, we got closer to our goal. But now, suddenly we aren't. So we try again. It's like, okay, might as well just add an 8th baseball, see if it works. Same thing happens. Now there's 2 left. So it throws 6, and there's 2 left. What's happening? Our bottleneck has changed. At first, the bottleneck was more. We needed to add in baseballs, and it started to throw, and we got to 6. But at a certain point, adding more did not get us closer to our goal. Our bottleneck has changed from needing more baseballs to having a more efficient machine. Because what happened is it was only able to throw 1 every 10 seconds or 6 in a minute. So we need to improve the efficiency of the machine, and that's the new bottleneck. So here we are. What do? We call in some mechanics. They start greasing up the wheel, throwing all this stuff in there, whatever they do to make a pitching machine go faster, and that would obviously be its own process. And they come to us and go, okay, boss, should be good. So we go, all right, thanks. If you remember, we have 8 baseballs in, so we run it again. It throws all 8. Machine clearly got more efficient. Now what do? We keep improving the machine because that's what just got us closer to our goal again? No. We go back to adding more baseballs. So we added volume. That was more. We improved the machine to make it better. Now we go back to what we were doing previously and add more baseballs. So we add a 9th. It throws all 9. We add a 10th. It throws all 10. We reached our goal. Now what? 2 choices. We reached our goal. The first is we can increase the goal and repeat the process. So what that would look like is if we doubled our goal to get to 20 baseballs, we would then go, okay, I need more baseballs, I need a better machine, need more baseballs, better machine, and we'd keep this going. But I said at the beginning, we talked to our batters, and they said, I only need 10 in a minute. So this would be not worth the effort. The people we're building this for do not need it to be any better than it is currently. So option 2 is to call it good enough and move on to the next bottleneck. Because what I didn't share at the beginning was this pitching machine was actually just a pitching machine in a big batting cage business. And the founder of the business looked at it and said, first thing we need to do is make sure the product is good enough for the people who come in. But now, maybe we need to build a concession stand for them to spend more money with us. Or we need to go market all the things of how great our pitching machine is. Whatever it is that now helps us grow the business is where the effort needs to get deployed. And that's what you guys are going to do, is just following this simple loop. Business Improvement 101, my 4th grade level graphic here. Set a goal, find the bottleneck. Make it good enough. Did I reach the goal? No. Identify the bottleneck. This is true on the macro of whatever, for him, it was improving the pitching machine. But then when you zoom in, that identify the bottleneck, like I said earlier, of it all being a system of systems, you're following this loop all the way down. And so this is what I want you guys to take away from this, is at any time, you're setting a goal, finding the bottleneck, finding out what good enough looks like. Did I reach it? No. Repeat. Did I reach it? Yes. Set a new goal. And that's what our pitching machine business was doing. So what can we learn from this example? Lesson number 4, bottleneck shift. What solves one bottleneck will not solve your next. What we saw was, in the beginning, we needed to add more baseballs. And we were rewarded for doing so. We were getting closer to our goal. We added a baseball. It got us closer. We experienced a reward, so we did it again. This works in the beginning for most people, in most businesses. You just need to do more in the beginning. The hard part is building this second part of the loop, which is when more no longer gets you closer to your goal. How do you step back, reevaluate, and find the new bottleneck? So an example could be if you start posting on Twitter, you would say, okay, at first I need to post 1 time per day, then 2, then 3, then 4, and whatever your goal is, a certain number of views. But you find when you get to 10, it no longer gets you closer. You've maxed out volume. Now you need to do that same amount of volume and do it better. And so that's that reevaluation step, which takes us to lesson number 5, which is the 2 most common types of bottlenecks are volume and efficiency. You solve volume problems with more, and you solve efficiency bottlenecks with better. And that leads to the last one, which is bottlenecks can and will repeat themselves. So Cole and I, where we're going to go into next, is breaking down all 22 bottlenecks that PGA solved to get to this point right now. And it's basically a constant ebb and flow back and forth between more and better and doing things you've already done, but now at a different scale. So like I said, more, better, more, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Quick recap on the pitching machine. Bottleneck shift, what solves one will not solve your next, so constant back and forth. The 2 most common types, volume and efficiency. And then lastly, get comfortable doing something you feel like you've already done because it will eventually repeat itself. This back and forth process makes sense? How you switch bottlenecks? You guys seeing how you could apply this to whatever business you're currently working on? Perfect. That brings us to what I'm most excited for is taking these 2 lenses of building the V1 of something and improving something you already have for a full breakdown of the 22 bottlenecks we've removed in order to get PGA to where it is today. So here it is on one slide, all 22 bottlenecks we've solved in order, from building the V1, where we were the marathon guy on the left trying to run the first marathon, to improving the system. And you can see the first one, as we'll talk about, was the first couple months. The last one have been the last 15 months. Okay, starting the story goes all the way back to October 2022, so almost 2 years ago. The original ideas for PGA started to happen. We'd done about 15 cohorts of Ship 30. Cole and I had done quite a few calls talking about the endless idea generator and all the core frameworks of Ship 30. However, we felt that the growth was stalling out a little bit because our organic content was slowing down. So at a certain point, you can only grow so fast after growing for a while. And we saw that a lot of our audience had already been exposed to this idea and we potentially wanted more. A couple other reasons, we were struggling to extend LTV due to honestly just not being good enough, understanding different monetization models. And then the real reason we built PGA was Cole and I, we wanted a new challenge. We wanted to go build new skills. We felt like we hadn't progressed from a skill set perspective in a couple months because we weren't doing anything new that required us to do so. So what was our first bottleneck? We needed a goal. So we sat down, just like the marathon man, and said, okay, here's our goal. Go from 200K to 500K a month. We picked that number kind of arbitrarily at We saw other people in the space doing about that much and said, cool, that would require us to do something different to get there. At first, to get to 200, it was exactly what we needed with Ship 30 and our back-end offer of the captain's table. But to get from to there to 500, there was just no way we were going to be able to generate the amount of traffic necessary to do so. Bottleneck number 2, we needed to figure out how to get there. We needed to go online, figure it out. What was the solution? Immersion. Cole and I spent quite a bit of time during that time period. This was December, January 22, early 23, just soaking in, talking to people, going through courses, trainings, masterminds, YouTube, everything to figure out what are all the potential paths we could take to get there. We ended up settling on group coaching. This, again, deserves its own entire kind of conversation, but basically 3 real reasons. We went from quarterly to daily feedback loops. So we're running a quarterly Ship 30 cohort, which meant each marketing cycle only happened once every 13 weeks, versus with a group coaching, you can have a daily feedback loop with your marketing. Second, we had ultra general to ultra specific scalable fulfillment. Ship 30 was just start writing online for 30 days. PGA had a more specific promise. We knew we could scale fulfillment on that. And then lastly, we felt this was a better offer. You remember when we talked to the acquisition.com team about potentially doing something with Ship 30 at the time? We were kind of getting audited of like, what would you guys do? And off the cuff, the guy we were talking to was like, yeah, well, of course you have what you have with organic, but like you're gonna have to scale to paid eventually if you want to grow to anything substantial. And Cole and I just like left the meeting feeling like we were slapped in the face. Like, well, duh, you have to do that. And we didn't know. So we chose group coaching, which led to the next bottleneck. How do you do this? We had no clue. We could have tried to do it on our own and go bootstrap every single bottleneck we were about to face, and that would have taken quite a long time. Or we could join a mastermind, pay 6 to 8 grand, buy someone else's mistakes right away. And so that was the choice we ended up making in early 2023. And this is ironic because a lot of people would look at this part of the slide, say 6 to 8,000 out, 0 in, horrible investment, but I think you'd agree that it's by far the best business investment we made, despite being terrified at the time to spend something like that. And so that led us to here in January 2023. This was the PGA team at the time, me, Cole, Daniel, who was the original bottleneck removal back in November of 2020, to take notes on the Ship 30 calls with me, so I didn't have to go re-listen to them. And now he basically runs the entire show, marketing, sales, fulfillment, keeps the entire ship running at all times and does so with a huge smile. Daniel's the man, of course. And then next we had Jamie, who at the time was my personal assistant. And we quickly found out together that I was just a single 26-year-old who really didn't have any personal responsibilities. So there wasn't much for her to do after a few months. So she dove into Ship 30 operations, customer support, and now works hand in hand with Daniel to, again, make this thing run smoothly. Unfortunately, Jamie is sick. Her family's sick, so she couldn't be here today, but she sends her best. So this was, at the time, the original PGA team. Next bottleneck. We needed to take a step in that direction. We didn't know what our bottleneck was until we started to do it. So in Feb 23, Cole tweeted this out, thinking of creating an 8-week intensive teaching writers how to create and sell ghostwritten email courses for 5 to 10K each. Overwhelming response. Tons of people responded, hey, I want in, I want in, I want in. Great. Now let's go build it. We looked ahead a little bit and said, what's the next bottleneck? Well, to fulfill on something like this, more than likely, we need more support. So Katie at the time was working on the captain's table, which was our back end of Ship 30, and she was by far the highest performer on that front. So we said, Katie, we love your help on this to fulfill on the original, or on the beta cohort of PGA. And since then, she's probably sent 50,000 Slack messages and over 700 welcome videos, probably to each and every one of you, and just brings a tremendous energy to everything we do. So this was the beta cohort team of PGA. And from there, we had to go build the V1. So what do we do? Bottleneck 6, we need people to find out about PGA. We could have done something super complex, like a big market analysis and whatever this guy in the middle is saying. Or we could just email our list and say, hey, we're doing this thing. So that's what we did. Then we had a bunch of people who were interested. We now had to convert that attention. What do we do? Cole and I took 40 sales calls in 3 days. We built the V1 of the sales script. At this point, I had a nice routine of waking up around 4:30 or 5. I'd immediately go outside and walk for like 2.5 hours, listening to the trainings from the mastermind we joined. And then I'd send Cole like an out-of-breath loom. This is what we got to do today. This is what I just learned. Like, all right, we're doing this. And he'd wake up and go, all right, let's do it. So we built it, and this was what our calendar looked like back then. This was February 13, 2023. You can see some familiar names. Nils is on there, Ash is on there, and I think a couple others, but no one else who made it today. That was my calendar on that day, and then David Lowen, the first one to join PGA, and we had our first sale. Then we had to solve the next bottleneck in order as it came up. We needed to deliver on the offer we just had, which meant Cole building that entire curriculum over a 4-week sprint. So he'd sit down a day before the live session, go, what am I going to create right now? One take, the entire curriculum, film a video on it, and then we do a live session. And at the time, Cole came down with a gnarly flu and basically showed up 2 days in a row hanging on by a thread like, all right, we just got to do this. We had to do what was required. And that effort is what built the original V1 of PGA, which brought us to here. So at this point, PGA V1 was built. We'd run our first marathon. It took us 2 months to do it, from the moment we decided to join to having it fully up and running with 40 students done. And we didn't overthink a single bit of the process. It quite literally was do the thing, what is the next bottleneck that emerged, solve that until the first thing is built. Now the last 15 or 14, for the last 15 months, has just been honing and improving that system time and time again. So we switched from, like I said, the Marathon Man to making the pitching machine faster. The good visual that sums up what we were doing. We were this guy on the computer, now we do this. And that brings us to April 2023, which I think Cole would agree was probably the most painful month in our business history, because we did our beta cohort of PGA. That was in February and March. We knew exactly what we were going to do to get to the next level. And instead, we had to stop and not do anything new with PGA because we had to do and fulfill a Ship 30 cohort. So almost everyone here is familiar with Ship 30. But Cole and I had to go do all the live sessions for Ship 30. Again, we only had a team of 5 at the time, so we didn't have the resources. So we had to basically sit on our hands and do nothing. And this was our revenue chart in April. So you can see, it looks like our business just died. Had a great couple months, and then we did our lowest month in 14 months in April of 2023 as we were getting ready to build PGA. And I remember just talking to Cole every day like, this is max pain. This is as painful as it gets to have to do nothing knowing exactly what we were going to do afterwards. So what did we do? Our bottleneck was patience. We had to figure out what to do in the meantime. And Cole and I did naturally what anyone would do in that situation. We built an entire new product, and we hired Justin to run it. So we had 9 hours of travel going to an in-person mastermind event, and Cole and I wrote about 10 editions of Write with AI at the time to kind of scratch the itch of building something, knowing we could build it that quickly. We hired Justin, and Justin's been crushing it, writing all the amazing AI prompts, building Write with AI to about $300K a year since then. All right, we also kind of backed off, said, look, we got a little bit more time. We're about to start a more complex business. Let's increase the scope with our fractional CFO, put that in place so we had everything we need to run an actual PGA business. There we go. From there, this is May 2023. So this is where things really started to accelerate for PGA. We had everything we needed in place to take PGA to the next level. Now it's time to iterate. Most of what I'm about to say for the next few is doing what we did the first time, consistently. So we built the V1. Now how do we just make that run on an evergreen basis? So first, we need people to find out. The same thing we had to do the first time, now just consistently. So we built the EEC flywheel. Cole wrote a whole book in about 2 months on the art and business of ghostwriting, wrote the EEC, social content, CTAs, marketing material, all that built to get enough eyeballs consistently. Then we had to convert people into PGA consistently. So we hired Tristan and Connor. These were their original DMs to me about the sales role that we started to hire for. So for anyone who was here last year who got to meet them in person, and then you see them this year, their growth has been nothing but astounding as someone who's gotten to witness it the entire way. They've both enrolled over 350 people into PGA, and they show no signs of slowing down. From there, our next bottleneck was performance of PGA students on the later part of the curriculum. We had so many people going through, and where they got stuck was at the end. We need additional support there. So our bottleneck went from marketing to sales to fulfillment. You can see the linear progression there. We needed to do the same thing consistently. So I hired Andrew. Andrew came in, immediately hit the ground running, reviewing sales calls, helping people with outreach, going the extra mile for people. We joke on the sales calls that he works 24/7, but I guess it's 16/7 because he's got to sleep a little bit. But he's a massive resource for everyone at PGA. Then we had to make enough marketing material, consistently. Cole and I were still creating all the content at the time, writing the newsletters, creating social content, all that stuff. We needed someone to take that off our plate to free up resources for us to reinvest elsewhere. So we hired Ash. Ash took over Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, repurposing, writing our newsletter, and he's the reason it looks like Cole and I never stop on any social platform, because he's running the whole show behind the scenes. And everything since Ash took over has started to reaccelerate. Next bottleneck. We needed to get more of those people that Ash was generating onto the calendar. So we had a lot of leads coming in, but not enough were actually taking the next step to book the call. What's the bottleneck? Marketing efficiency. So we hired Artia. Artia stepped in, started to talk to all the people who applied but didn't join or didn't book a call. Hey, what's going on? She got in our school group, started to set out of there. And now something like 30 to 40% of all the calls that we generate, Artia has some touch in the process, and it's just world-class consistency showing up every single day, doing the best job. So that brings us to where we were last year, which feels like a very small event compared to what we're doing now. We had 13 people. This was November 2023. This was taken in the shipyard. It's funny, as I was putting this together, I didn't even think about the shipyard or mention it because it actually didn't solve a bottleneck. It was just cool. And that's okay to do. And the lesson there is that not everything you have to do has to be so analytically systematic on solving a bottleneck. Sometimes you can just build a sick studio because it's cool. And so that's what we did. And then that brought us to the last 12 months. So very first thing we said after that event, after Black Friday, after the start of the new year, Cole and I sat down, and again, our bottleneck became fulfillment. We learned so much from 600 people, 500 people who'd come through PGA at the time. How could we improve it? So Cole and I said, all right, it's curriculum upgrade week. That quickly turned into curriculum overhaul quarter, where Cole rewrote the entire thing, refilmed every video, basically made it as handhold as possible to make it easier to fulfill on. Then we noticed we were creating all this social content from all these different other places, but we had many hours in the day where people weren't hearing Cole's voice. So Cole started to commit to building on YouTube. We hired Mackenzie, who's been scaling Cole all over YouTube. And what are you up to subscriber now? 30,000, 40,000, something like that? Again, no signs of slowing down, solving each bottleneck as it shows up. We had a bunch more people coming through. Now we needed more slots on the calendar because the calendar was full. So because Cole started on YouTube, the resonance of what we were offering started to make sense. So we hired Josh. Josh was actually, before that, working on our Instagram. If you don't follow Josh on Instagram, highly recommend. Very, very talented on video. But I had one conversation with him, and I was like, you need to be selling for us, dude. You need to be on Instagram. So he started closing. Tristan recruited him to the Closer House, and he's been living there ever since. And 5 months in a row has improved and improved and improved and improved. And we're very excited for him to take the next couple steps. From there, we had all this going. We had all this infrastructure in place, but it was choppy. Some months, some days it'd be amazing, some days it'd be slow, because we were relying very heavily on organic. And just like we said, we realized about 8 months earlier, we were going to have to add pay to whatever it is we did. So I took it on me to say, I'm going to go learn how this works. I'm going to immerse myself, just like we did in the V1 of building PGA, into these trainings, figure out how to build the vortex that Cole talked about earlier. We brought on Vigo, who's been helping out on the LinkedIn side and teaching me a lot in the process as well. So that started to work. We got more people on the calendar, which led to April of this year. So we've been doing PGA for about a year. Cole and I said, okay, if we're really going to take this to the next level, we need all of our attention. So this, I didn't prepare to talk about this part, but the big decision of taking Ship 30 from live to async, we delayed for a good bit of time because before that, it wasn't proven out that PGA was working. But once we had all the predictability of PGA, Ship 30 was like, if you're on an island and you have one pipe to water, and water in our case was money coming into the business, just don't touch that and touch everything else and figure it out until you have another pipe that's working. And then once we had PGA working consistently, we could go mess with that other thing. So we spent all of April and May this year taking Ship 30 from a cohort-based course to async. In like 4 days, Cole and I filmed about 40 videos and drank about 40 cups of coffee to do so, and got Ship 30 to a place where now it runs on autopilot. So we again freed up capacity to spend more time on PGA. Then we also recognized that we need more help running our personal lives at this point. We had a little bit more responsibility. So Cole and I both got personal assistants. Again, took things off our plate to reinvest into PGA to do full time. Then again, all the things we did before were leading to more enrollments, and we had more ability to provide better results for each student. So we overhauled our one-to-many model and said, let's build a one-to-one fulfillment engine. which led us to hire Ollie, Mitch, then Brandon, and Jamie in 2 months. And now we have a fully scalable fulfillment model based on Katie and Andrew teaching them and getting them up and running. And since we've implemented this, our NPS scores are way up, Net Promoter, our student results are way up. Watching that team build its own culture has been very awesome to see. And I have no doubt that this team's going to continue to grow as we go to the next level. And then lastly, bottleneck number 22, capacity to take enough enrollments to hit 120 per month. So this was our goal at this point, to get to a consistent 120 from about 65 to 80 is what we're doing right now, which meant all these other pieces were in place. Now we just need to open up the calendar. We hired Nick, who's here today. Jessica couldn't make it, and they both got their first deal last week, so they're off and running. So all of this leads to this slide, which is the team today. Crazy to put something like this together compared to what it was just 18 months ago. And I think the big takeaway I want to share here is you might look at what we have in PGA, this event, the curriculum, the team, and say there had to be some massive plan to get there, and you had to have been able to see it from that far away. But as I put this together, I recognized every single person and every single thing we've built was quite literally to solve one bottleneck at a time. One by one by one by one. And so I don't know what the next 25 bottlenecks are going to be, but I know having the team we have, the ownership, the energy, the tempo that they show up with, we can tackle anything. So I'm fired up for taking the next steps with this team. So what did we learn? We talked systems 101, inputs, process, outputs, 3 separate parts of the system. We looked at the 4 different types of bottlenecks, doing more, adding something, removing something, fixing something. We learned not to be this guy and how to solve one bottleneck at a time and not be reading David Goggins' books when you don't know what bottleneck you're solving. If you don't have a goal, that's your bottleneck. Bottlenecks present themselves only when you take a step towards them and fail. Solving one bottleneck will show you the next. We talked about the pitching machine, how to shift back and forth from more to better, volume and efficiency, and then how to repeat a bottleneck that you solved in the past. And then lastly, we showed 22 bottlenecks to build this entire team. And what I'll leave you with is, if I've learned anything in business, life, it's every time I was actually moving forward on something, it's when I was ruthlessly focused on the bottleneck and saying no to everything else. So that's what I leave you with today. If your goal is to move fast, if your goal is to make a lot of progress, rely on bottleneck analysis. Yeah, let's do some questions. Fire them away. Who had a golden nugget? You can share a golden nugget and not a question. What stood out? What'd you write down? Blurt it out. Go for it. It's getting as specific as possible, but actually removing time frames. I think like SMART goals, the last one's time bound. It's like I got to do all this by this time. And if you just remove the time and say all I have to do is whatever income goal instead of an income goal by a certain time, it just takes the full pressure off, because you're never going to think, oh, I got to get there so much quicker. So that's kind of what I want to build around. It's just like, what if you took the same goal and gave yourself 5 years to do it? How would you change? And if the goal was to be there in 5 years consistently rather than get there and then fall off. So like when we set the goal with Ship 30, we probably could have gotten just Ship 30 to 500K for 1 month, but there was no way we were going to have that go for 24 months. And so that's the difference in setting goals. If we just said we had to get there in 1 month, we would have squeezed out what we currently had versus just get there and stay there. That's the main difference.
How do you decide what should be the goal?
Good question. I don't know. I don't have the right answer for that. Gut feeling? Yeah, I couldn't define it. I couldn't define that one. I don't think you need to overthink it, though. It's like pick a goal, take steps there. Worst case, you're going to build skills along the way that you could then reapply to another goal. The only thing is sitting there is like, I don't know what my goal is, so I shouldn't take a step towards anything. Pick some goal, because that actual goal didn't matter. It's just got you taking the first step. Yeah, I think you should feel remarkably sick of it before you do something else. You should have done it so many times in a row that it feels boring, monotonous, and then you're probably halfway there. And it's got to feel boring for quite a bit of time before you end up changing. I mean, we ran 15 cohorts of Ship 30. I said the same jokes to Cole 15 times. 20, yeah, we ended up running 20. I said the same jokes at the same time to Cole. And sometimes we like switch it up and let him say one of the jokes just to like feel something. And that was it. And so by the time we shut that down, I could repeat every single live session verbatim for an hour times 8 very easily. And that's what eventually got us to start PGA, was doing that for as long as we did. What else? Thoughts, questions, ideas?
It's a good reflection cadence for looking at the bottlenecks and see if they're too many of these or they're working.
I'd rather not prescribe something specific other than if you can't define what you're working on, you need a reflection period. So if you can't define the actions, either macro, so like we're actually not doing this, like I couldn't name it right now, but like our main bottleneck is a consistency in our marketing process. That's what we have now. And so we have a goal to get a certain number of calls on the calendar and all resources are going towards that. So I can say, okay, do I know where I'm trying to focus things right now? And if you can't name that, you should zoom back and reflect on what you're trying to do. And do that at a certain level, like keep zooming out until you don't have a goal to chunk down on, right? So it's like I want the whole goal right now for PGA is 120 enrollments per month consistently. That's like the goal. And so everything comes down from that, of getting more specific on what the bottleneck is for each of those. So I was talking to Tristan. It's like you can't commit to doing any more than 3 things at a time. And this is actually what deserves its own keynote, but basically you can only keep track of 3 things in your head because there's 3 connections between all 3 items. So if you picture a triangle, this one connects to these 2, this one connects to these 2, this one connects to these. So there's 3 items and 3 connections. If you add a 4th, you have 4 items, but now you have 6 connections. And it's kind of abstract, but your brain can't keep track of all of them at the same time. So if you only have 3, so I had Tristan, it's like you should have an income goal, a health goal, and some kind of family relationship goal. And that's what you're committed to upholding. So that's kind of the 101 primer on it. But having any more than 3 things, you can't rattle off 3 in a row. So 4 is too many. So it's just cap it at 3. Great. All right. Helpful? Applicable? Good. Awesome.